From the moment the lights went out, it was clear this wasn't going to be a tactical chess match. It was instinct versus instinct. History against repetition. Ferrari's setup had leaned toward aggression. Rear ride height lowered by 3 millimeters, trimmed for speed down Mexico's kilometer-long straight. It was a gamble for power at the expense of downforce. Red Bull, as ever, played the opposite game. Their RB21B carried the extra drag, but in exchange, Verstappen's car planted itself through the high-altitude corners like it was stapled to the road. Two philosophies separated by data sheets, destined to collide somewhere around turn 1. Hamilton launched cleanly. Third place held. The SF25 moved with confidence, neutral through the first complex. Behind, Verstappen stalked. The Dutchman never sits long in anyone's mirrors. Not Hamilton's, not anyone's. Lap after lap, he carved the delta down, half a tenth through Sector 2, another through the stadium. By the 5th lap, the pattern was visible on the timing screens. Verstappen wasn't waiting for degradation. He was waiting for a moment to redefine it. And then came lap 6. The approach to turn 1 was a mirror image of their shared history. Hamilton protecting the inside, Verstappen gambling on the impossible. 80 meters later on the brakes. At 5.6 G, that's not bravery, that's belief in physics holding its breath. The front left on the Red Bull snatched briefly, locked, released. And then the two cars touched. A brush, small but decisive. The Ferrari was forced wide, the Red Bull straight-lined the corner, tore through the grass and rejoined ahead. Normally, the next line we'd expect from race control is simple. Car 1, give the position back. Not this time. Instead, a colder message scrolled across the feed. Incident noted. In Formula 1, that's bureaucratic limbo. Acknowledgement without action. Moments later, the steward's decision appeared. No further investigation necessary. It wasn't outrage you felt in the Ferrari garage. It was silence. Engineers stared at data that couldn't explain judgment. The precedent from Austria, from Bahrain, said one thing, the FIA said another. From Hamilton's cockpit came a clipped response. Nothing theatrical, just controlled disbelief. What began as a racing move now sat as a moral question. Because from that moment, it wasn't about lap time anymore, it was about faith, and whether the rulebook still meant what it used to. When the stewards labelled Verstappen's move a racing incident, the engineers didn't reach for emotion. They reached for numbers. Because in Formula 1, numbers are supposed to be truth. Yet in Mexico, even truth felt negotiable. Ferrari's telemetry told a story far sharper than the official summary. Hamilton had lifted 2/10 earlier than Verstappen into turn 1, a deliberate adjustment to manage the front left, which had already touched 110. Degrees Celsius on lap 4, brake pressure peaked at 87 bar, Verstappen's reached 92. Entry velocity, 268 kilometers per hour for the Red Bull, 5 slower for the Ferrari. At the apex, the delta vanished. 2 cars, 1 corner, 0 margin for physics. The difference came after. The altitude above Mexico City, roughly 2,200 meters, cuts air density by nearly 25%. Downforce evaporates. Grip becomes theory. Both cars drifted wide, but Verstappen's inside line gave him grass to exploit, while Hamilton's outside left him with dust and debris. GPS overlays would later confirm what the naked eye already sensed. Verstappen bypassed roughly 20 meters of circuit, rejoining with a 0.4 2-second advantage. It sounds small, but in Formula 1 that's the length of an argument. Article 27.3 of the sporting regulations couldn't be clearer. A driver leaving the track and gaining a lasting advantage must relinquish that advantage. The data made the definition self-evident. The decision did not. Ferrari highlighted the time delta in red on their post-stint brief. They even compared it to Austria 2024, where Hamilton had been penalised 5 seconds for an off-track gain of 0.39 seconds. 2 actions, same scale, opposite rulings. The irony was that everyone could see it. The FIA's own telemetry feed is now public through F1's official data stream. Any engineer, any analyst, any fan could overlay the traces and reach the same conclusion. It wasn't bias that stung, it was opacity. In the commentary box, you could almost feel the disbelief ripple through the paddock. A sport that measures throttle pressure to the decimal was suddenly explaining decisions with adjectives. Those 4/10 became more than a statistic. They became evidence. Because when the data contradicts the verdict, something fundamental breaks. And the teams knew it. The stewards might control the penalties, but the numbers control the truth. Those 6/10 on the timing sheets told a story the FIA never dared to read aloud. Every Formula One battle is born long before the race begins, in wind tunnels, CFD clusters, and the geometry of belief. Ferrari and Red Bull arrived in Mexico with two conflicting visions of speed. Ferrari's engineers opted for efficiency, a low-drag configuration that flattened the SF25's rear ride height by 3 mm, gaining roughly 2 km/h on the straights, but leaving the rear axle lighter under braking. Red Bull went the other way. Higher wing angle, increased rake, more load on entry, slower on the straights, but planted in the corners. Hamilton, ever the purist, embraced the risk. "Leave it alive at the rear," he'd told the team after FP3. He wanted the car loose, reactive, free to rotate. Verstappen, as always, leaned towards stability, a car that obeyed even when chaos arrived. These philosophies met in the middle of turn 1, and something had to give. At 270 km/h, Hamilton's SF25 sat on the knife edge between rotation and runaway. The Red Bull's aero platform, heavier and more consistent, allowed Verstappen to brake 80 meters later, but robbed him of agility when he needed it most. The contact wasn't born of aggression, it was born of aerodynamics disagreeing with human instinct. Inside the Ferrari garage, engineers already knew what had happened before the replay aired. Brake surface temperatures spiked past 920 degrees Celsius, right where their predictive models had warned instability would begin. On Red Bull's telemetry, the steering torque curve dipped sharply mid-corner, the telltale sign of dirty air robbing the front wing of flow. Two teams, two correct decisions, one inevitable clash. But in Formula One, perfection is judged not by physics but by perception. The same collision that could be described as racing hard can, with a change of tone, become avoidable contact. Red Bull's philosophy looked disciplined, Ferrari's looked desperate. The line between genius and recklessness often depends on which colour finishes ahead. Under the cost cap, philosophy itself has become a strategic risk. Every millimetre of rake, every degree of flap angle, is a political decision disguised as engineering. Mexico exposed that tension in full view, design intent punished by human interpretation. When the dust settled, the telemetry told engineers what they already suspected. Both cars were right, both drivers committed, and yet only one was protected. That divergence wasn't just technical, it was psychological. When the penalty finally came through, the room didn't explode. It froze. On Ferrari's pit wall, the air turned dense, heavier than the altitude outside. A single line on the timing monitor carried the weight of an entire season. 10-second time penalty, car 44. In a sport addicted to noise, the silence said everything. Hamilton didn't protest. Not immediately. He'd seen this before, just never aimed at him. Inside his helmet, the breathing stayed even, the radio discipline unshaken. "Copy, understood?" Two words that carried no emotion and all of it. Behind the visor, something colder settled in. Not anger, clarity. The realization that fairness is negotiable when the stakes are high enough. Ferrari's strategists reacted faster than their driver. Within 30 seconds, simulations had run. The penalty dropped Hamilton from 3rd to 6th. Points swing, 8. Championship implications severe. The engineers didn't need commentary to explain the stakes. The numbers on the screen already screamed them. One decision, one steward's signature, and an entire season's narrative flipped mid-flight. What made it sharper was the contrast. Minutes earlier, Verstappen had straight-lined turn 4 after contact with Norris, gaining roughly half a second by bypassing the chicane. Race control's response? Incident noted. No further action. Same regulation, same advantage gained, different outcome. The precedent wasn't just inconsistent, it was inverted. Hamilton's engineer didn't editorialize, he didn't need to. For reference, Max gained 0.48 on the cut. We're under investigation for 0.42. The math didn't lie. The stewards did. Or at least their logic did. Because in Formula One, interpretation is everything. And interpretation, it turns out, is selective. Inside the Ferrari motorhome, the mood didn't crack into rage. It calcified into something grimmer. Engineers who'd spent decades chasing milliseconds now watched those same milliseconds dismissed as irrelevant when wielded against them. Vasseur didn't shout. He stood at the data wall, arms crossed, jaw set, and said nothing. But his silence was louder than any protest. It said, "We played by the rules, and the rules changed mid-game." The sanction didn't just alter positions, it altered belief. Because every driver on the grid operates on an implicit contract. That contact is racing, intent is judged fairly, and outcomes reflect action, not politics. Mexico shattered that. It told Hamilton, and every driver watching, that fairness isn't a given. It's a privilege, granted inconsistently. By the time Hamilton crossed the line in sixth, his frustration had crystallized into something sharper. Not bitterness, resolve. The kind that says, I'll win despite this, not because of fairness. That's the dangerous thing about unjust penalties. They don't demoralize champions, they fuel them. What began as a sanction became a statement. Not from the FIA, but from the grid itself. Because when governance falters, drivers remember. And in Formula One, memory is long, sharp, and unforgiving. Across the paddock, reactions split along predictable lines, but not cleanly. Red Bull kept their heads down, offering only polite non-comment. "We trust the stewards," Horner said, with the kind of diplomacy that sounds like agreement, but means nothing. McLaren was blunter. "It's frustrating to see inconsistency," Norris remarked, careful not to draw his own penalty for criticising officials. Even Mercedes, usually measured, couldn't mask their disbelief. Wolff's statement was clinical. "We'll review with the FIA." Translation: this isn't over. The media, always quick to sense blood, circled immediately. Within an hour, side-by-side telemetry comparisons flooded social platforms. Fans didn't need commentary to understand. The overlays told the story in a language more universal than any press release. Identical maneuvers, opposite consequences. The hashtag that emerged wasn't subtle. Same rule book, different rules. Among the drivers, a quiet tension surfaced. In the cool-down room, glances carried weight. No one accused anyone outright. They didn't need to. The air itself held judgment. Verstappen, ever unbothered, shrugged it off with his trademark bluntness. "I just drive. The stewards decide." It was truth, but hollow, because everyone in that room knew that some decisions favour momentum, and momentum in Formula One has a colour. Hamilton's post-race interview was a masterclass in restraint. He didn't attack, he didn't plead, he simply stated fact. "The regulations are clear. We all read the same document. I just hope it's applied the same way next time." The phrasing was careful, the tone measured, but the message was a blade. He wasn't questioning the penalty, he was questioning the system. Behind closed doors, team principals began their own calculus. Ferrari prepared an official protest, knowing it would likely fail, but establishing precedent for future appeals. Red Bull quietly lobbied against procedural changes, framing consistency as letting racing be racing. The politics moved faster than the cars ever could. What none of them said aloud, but all of them understood, was this: the sanction in Mexico wasn't an anomaly, it was a signal. That in the grey zones where rules meet interpretation, power still matters, legacy still matters, and fairness, no matter how loudly it's promised, remains the most fragile currency in motorsport. By Sunday night, the headlines wrote themselves, 10 seconds that changed everything. But they didn't change everything, they confirmed it. That Formula One, for all its precision, still runs on human judgment, and human judgment inevitably is flawed. The sanction didn't end the rivalry, it deepened it. Because now, every braking zone carries a new question. Will this be judged or will this be racing? And in that uncertainty, trust dissolves. In Geneva, the whispers began before the podium had even emptied. The FIA doesn't respond to controversy, it manages it. And Mexico, within hours, became something that needed managing. Statements were drafted, revised, softened. The official line: decisions are made independently by the stewards based on the specifics of each incident. Corporate, sterile, unconvincing. Behind that formality, the real debate was sharper. Inside the FIA's technical working group, engineers reviewed the same telemetry Ferrari had flagged. The overlays were damning. Verstappen's turn 4 cut and Hamilton's turn 12 re-entry showed nearly identical time advantages, rebris, both within half a second. Yet only one triggered punishment. When the data is public, denying inconsistency becomes impossible. The question wasn't whether the stewards were wrong, it was whether they could admit it without undermining their authority. They couldn't. So instead, the FIA pivoted. A carefully worded press release appeared Monday morning, promising enhanced clarity in future applications of track limits regulations. It was reform disguised as reaffirmation, an admission without apology. The phrase that stood out: context-dependent enforcement. In plain language, we'll keep doing what we've been doing, but with better PR. Ferrari wasn't satisfied. Their formal protest, submitted within the regulatory 2-hour window, cited Article 27.3 verbatim and attached 23 pages of telemetry, GPS data, and precedent analysis. It was less a protest than a legal thesis. The conclusion was unavoidable. If the rule applies to Hamilton, it must apply to Verstappen. The FIA's response came faster than expected. Protest dismissed. Stewards' decisions are final. That finality stung more than the penalty itself, because it confirmed what the Paddock had long suspected, that governance in Formula One isn't about fairness, it's about authority. Once a decision is made, the system protects the decision, not the principle behind it. The cost cap revolutionized spending. Transparency revolutionized data access. But the one thing that hasn't evolved is accountability. Calls for reform grew louder. Pundits suggested permanent stewards, the same panel at every race, eliminating the roulette of rotating officials. Others proposed real-time review systems, where race control could correct errors mid-race rather than solidifying them post-event. Even drivers joined the chorus. "We just want consistency," Leclerc said. "If it's a penalty one week, it should be a penalty the next." But institutional change in Formula One moves glacially. The governance structure, split between the FIA, Formula One management and the teams, thrives on ambiguity. Clear rules threaten flexibility, and flexibility, however frustrating, keeps politics alive. Mexico didn't break the system, it exposed how well the system protects itself. For Hamilton and Ferrari, the institutional response confirmed what the penalty had implied, that in Formula One, justice is less about what happened and more about who decides what happened. The stopwatch doesn't lie, but the rulebook can be read selectively. And so the cycle continues. Controversy sparks debate. Debate sparks promises. Promises fade into the next race weekend. Mexico will join the archive of disputed calls. Suzuka 89, Spa 08, Canada 19. Moments where the sport's precision collides with its humanity, and humanity wins. Because in the end, Formula One isn't governed by algorithms. It's governed by people. And people, no matter how experienced, bring bias, error and doubt. The only question is whether the sport can afford to keep pretending otherwise. Mexico was supposed to be another duel in the Hamilton-Verstappen saga. Instead, it became something heavier, a mirror reflecting Formula One's oldest flaw. Precision on track, ambiguity off it. The sanction didn't just decide positions, it exposed philosophy. For the FIA, the line between racing incident and gaining advantage had blurred into subjectivity. For the Paddock, that blur looked like bias. Inside the FIA's Geneva headquarters, whispers of procedural review surfaced within hours. The official phrasing, a reassessment of stewarding communication consistency, sounded sterile, but everyone knew what it meant: damage control. Once again, Formula One was reacting, not regulating. It's a pattern as old as the sport itself. When decisions fracture public trust, reform follows, but only after the scars. Ferrari's Monday debrief was clinical. Engineers reviewed telemetry frame by frame, mapping Hamilton's re-entry speed and Verstappen's cut-line delta. The conclusion was damning in its simplicity. Both maneuvers resulted in comparable time gains, less than half a second, yet only one was punished. The rule had been applied, yes, but its spirit had been ignored. That's the paradox of modern Formula One. Legality without logic. For Hamilton, this wasn't just a setback. It was the moment he stopped assuming fairness was self-regulating. You could sense it in the way he addressed the media the following day, measured, precise, almost diplomatic. "We all want clarity," he said. That word, clarity, has become the driver's unofficial plea in the data era. Among the teams, a quiet consensus began to form. The stewarding system itself was now part of the competition. Each weekend brought new interpretations, new precedents, and the unsettling realization that luck with officials could be as decisive as luck with weather. Engineers deal in constants, the FIA was dealing in variables. Talks began circulating of introducing a permanent stewarding panel for 2026, the same core officials travelling to every race, eliminating inconsistency by continuity. It's an idea years overdue, but inside the political machinery of Formula One, good ideas often move slower than cars in traffic. For Hamilton and Ferrari, the turning point wasn't the penalty, it was the principle. They'd played the sport by the rules, and watch the rules shift mid-race. That realization cuts deeper than any championship loss. Because every great rivalry depends on one shared foundation, the belief that the stopwatch is truth. And in Mexico, truth blinked. Every generation of Formula One thinks its controversies are unique, until the past starts whispering. What happened in Mexico wasn't new, it was a modern echo of an old frequency. Suzuka, 1989. Senna disqualified for rejoining through an escape road after contact with Prost. The same debate, different century. Then, too, the governing body argued unsporting re-entry. Then, too, the Paddock questioned intent, not action. Senna called it politics. The word still fits. Hamilton's sanction sits on that same historical shelf, where interpretation outweighs incident. It's the space between rules and reputation. Schumacher's black flag at Silverstone in 1994, Alonso's impeding penalty in Monza 2006, Vettel's Canada 2019 moment, all chapters of the same story. When governance becomes theatre. What separates Mexico 2025 is the visibility. Back then, fans relied on commentators. Now, they have access to GPS overlays, throttle traces, and slow-motion replays in 4K. Transparency was supposed to protect credibility. Instead, it weaponized scrutiny. Within hours, journalists overlaid Hamilton's and Verstappen's telemetry, publishing graphics that looked more like courtroom evidence than race data. The curves matched within tenths. The internet didn't need editorializing. The images told the truth. A different outcome, same traces, read one headline. The verdict of public opinion was unanimous even if the FIA's wasn't. Inside the paddock, older engineers drew parallels of their own. "This is Suzuka all over again," muttered one veteran mechanic who'd worked through the Senna era. "Same altitude, same politics, same silence." It wasn't nostalgia, it was exhaustion. Formula One evolves technologically, but its governance drags like a worn tyre through traffic. And yet, there's something cyclical, almost poetic in that repetition. These moments, Senna's protest, Schumacher's defiance, Hamilton's disbelief, they're not stains on the sport, they're stress tests. They reveal where Formula One's precision meets its humanity. Because beneath the carbon fibre, the wind tunnels, and the terabytes of telemetry, this is still a competition refereed by people. And people inevitably err. The lesson from Mexico isn't about punishment, it's about perception. Fans can forgive mistakes. What they can't forgive is inconsistency. The FIA will issue clarifications, maybe even reforms, but the echo will remain. The reminder that fairness must evolve as quickly as technology. Because in Formula One, history doesn't repeat, it calibrates. And when governance lags behind data, controversy becomes the only constant. In the end, the Hamilton sanction wasn't just a judgment, it was a junction. 10 seconds that split the paddock, rewrote the headlines, and redefined what fairness means in a sport built on precision. The FIA applied the letter of the law with mechanical discipline, but in doing so, they exposed something far more fragile, the trust that keeps the stopwatch sacred. On paper, Article 27.3 was enforced correctly. Hamilton left the track and gained an advantage. Case closed. But in practice, precedent isn't paper, it's memory. The same rule, ignored for Verstappen minutes earlier, became decisive when applied to Hamilton. That contradiction didn't just cost a podium, it cost credibility. Formula One's obsession with accuracy falters when human interpretation becomes the variable. Ferrari's engineers called it a double standard. The FIA called it context. But context doesn't change throttle traces or GPS overlays. Both maneuvers yielded similar gains, under half a second each. Both avoided contact. Only one carried punishment. The mathematics didn't lie, the consistency did. Hamilton's restraint in the aftermath spoke volumes. No outburst, no accusation, or just quiet disillusion. "We just want clarity," he'd said. In that simplicity lies the core truth of modern Formula One. Speed is measurable, but justice isn't. For a sport that can calculate fuel flow to the milliliter, ambiguity remains its greatest inefficiency. The sanction in Mexico will fade from headlines, but not from consequence. Within the FIA, review committees will draft new language, teams will tighten their lobbying, and the paddock will move on. Yet every driver will carry that doubt into the next braking zone. Because fairness, once questioned, becomes part of the risk calculation. In the data, the answers were clear. In the garage, they were complicated. Ferrari's car was fast. The penalty was procedural. But belief, that final invisible component, was fractured. And in Formula One, belief is the ultimate performance variable. So the question that remains isn't whether Hamilton was wrong. It's whether Formula One can still afford to be subjective in a sport defined by measurement. When the stopwatch says one thing and the rulebook says another, which do we trust? Because if fairness becomes flexible, then Formula One stops being competition and starts being interpretation.